"You don't have to say it," she said. The silence already did. Jessa didn't raise her voice, didn't cry, didn't blink too fast, even though her chest was tight. She stood by the vending machine in the hospital hallway, arms crossed, staring at the man who once promised never to disappear. Calder Rourke looked like he hadn't slept. His designer coat was still crisp, but his voice cracked. "I thought giving you space was better than saying the wrong thing." "Wrong," she said, biting the word. "You didn't give space. You gave absence." The vending machine hummed behind them. Down the hall, a nurse called for a consult, but that moment belonged only to the two of them. Jessa stepped forward. "My dad collapsed. I called you from the ambulance, and you waited 2 days to leave a voicemail." "I know," Calder whispered. She shook her head. "No, you don't. Because you weren't here to know anything." He dropped his eyes, said nothing. "That was 3 years ago. He left. She stayed. And somehow her life kept going." The memory always came back at quiet times, when she shelved books, when the lights dimmed at closing, when a child laughed too loud and she smiled too quickly. Love didn't disappear in big moments. It faded in the spaces between them, in unanswered calls, in birthdays skipped, in hospital nights spent alone. She didn't see him again, not for years, until the doorbell over the bookstore chimed one Tuesday afternoon, and Jessa looked up, and there he was. Not the same, not entirely different. He didn't say her name, just stepped forward and spoke like time hadn't passed. "I was hoping for recommendation." She stared at him, not with anger, not quite with clarity. "Fiction?" she asked flatly. "Or regret?" He almost smiled, but didn't. True." She walked to the shelf behind her, pulled out a paperback that had been borrowed, returned, reread, and shelved again. Held it out without stepping closer. "Start here." He took the book. Their hands didn't touch. "Thanks," he said. She said nothing, and he walked out the door. That was all, but not really. "You don't have to come. We'll figure it out," Jessa had said. Her voice was calm, but her hands weren't. They clutched the phone like it could anchor her, like Calder's voice. His steady, familiar voice could make what just happened less terrifying. Her dad had collapsed in their kitchen. No warning, no sound, just a sudden fall that turned every room cold. And Calder, her boyfriend of almost 2 years, he didn't pick up the first time she called, or the second, the third time he answered, with a strained hey, background noise humming behind him. She explained quickly. "There's hospital, stroke." She was scared. "Loan. I'll check in later. Okay?" He said, I'm in back-to-back meetings right now. You've got your mom with you? No. She passed. Remember? Silence. Right? He muttered. I'm sorry. I'll call you tonight. He didn't. 2 days passed. Her father stabilized. She spent the nights in a vinyl chair that squeaked every time she adjusted her weight. The nurses were kind. The hallway vending machine wasn't. On the 3rd morning, Jessa's phone buzzed. Not a call. A voicemail. I hope your dad pulls through. I'm stepping away for a while. I need to think. That was it. No apology. No explanation. No conversation. Just distance, packaged into polite words. She didn't call him back. She didn't text. What do you say to someone who made their decision before you even got a chance to speak? She packed his books from her apartment, left them in a box near the elevator, told the doorman they'd be picked up. He never came for them. She donated them 2 weeks later. Grief doesn't always hit with sobbing. Sometimes it's quiet. Jessa showed up at the hospital every day, took notes, asked questions, paid bill, signed forms. When her dad finally came home, he couldn't walk without help. She turned their guest room into his bedroom, bought grab bars, meal prep containers, whiteboards for medication. She didn't cry until 2 months later over a broken washing machine that flooded the floor. She sat on the wet tiles, soaking, shaking, and finally letting go. It wasn't about Calder. Not directly, but it was about the weight she carried alone. Her life changed shape. She cut her hair short, took a job managing her friend's bookstore while they moved abroad, stopped saying yes to invitations that felt like obligation, stopped explaining her silence to people who didn't ask how she was. She became known around town as reliable, steady, someone who always showed up. No one knew what she'd lost. Or maybe they did, and were kind enough not to say it out loud. 3 years passed. Then came the Tuesday. The bell over the bookstore door jingled, and there he stood. Calder Rourke. Older, slightly leaner, still expensive in how he carried himself, but softer. Or maybe just tired. She didn't smile, didn't move. Hey, he said, as if they'd spoken last week. She raised one eyebrow. Can I help you? I was hoping for a recommendation. Her pulse didn't race. Her throat didn't close. She wasn't that girl anymore, but something in her chest still ached. She walked slowly to the middle shelf in the fiction section, pulled out a paperback, held it out. Start here, she said. He took it. Their hands didn't touch. Thanks, he said again. She nodded once, then turned back to the register. He walked out. She didn't watch him leave, but she didn't shelve another book for 10 minutes after the door closed. Later that night, she sat on her porch with a mug of mint tea. The street was quiet. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk. She thought about deleting his voicemail again, but she didn't, not yet. The weeks after Calder's silence weren't loud. They weren't cinematic. They didn't come with angry speeches or messy confrontations. They came with dishes in the sink, appointments alone, and dinner eaten while standing. Her father's condition forced everything to shift. The man who once walked 3 miles every morning now needed help standing. He didn't complain. That made it harder. "I'm sorry to be a burden," he said once, while she tied his shoe. "You're not," she replied. And she meant it. But that didn't make it easy. What made it harder was how few people did. Friends offered help, but mostly once. Then got quiet. Texts stopped. Visits dried up. She didn't blame anyone. Life moved fast for people not living inside grief. Jessa learned how to move slowly. She took over managing the bookstore from Nora, her friend from college. Nora had moved to Seattle to pursue writing full-time and needed someone she trusted to handle the store. "You're good with people," she'd said. Jessa wasn't sure about that, but she was good with rhythm. The bookstore had rhythm. Mornings began with opening the shutters, turning on the soft yellow lights, and letting the scent of old pages greet her like a friend. Mid-mornings brought regulars, retired men who asked for newspapers, kids who wanted stickers, women looking for the perfect gift for a sister or a son. Afternoons were quiet. Time to shelve, sort, sip lukewarm tea. Evenings, she closed the register, swept the floor, and watched the sunstripe gold across the hardwood. She didn't just work there. She belonged there. Thursdays were her favorite. Story time at 4 o'clock. Children from the neighborhood piled in. Muddy sneakers, tangled hair, big questions. She read them classics, silly stories, fables. They called her Miss Jessa and interrupted her mid-sentence. They hugged her legs and asked if dragons were real. One boy, Malcolm, asked if she was married. "No," she answered with a soft smile. He nodded. "You should marry a nice man who works at a zoo." "Why a zoo?" "Because then you could see monkeys every day and never be sad." It was the kind of logic she didn't argue with. She laughed harder than she had in weeks. At home, her routines were quiet. She cooked small meals, took walks after dinner, watched old movies. She didn't date, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't trust quickly anymore. Silence had become something she respected, but never from others. She respected her own silence, her own space, her ability to sit in a room alone and not feel incomplete. Her father eventually recovered enough to walk again, slower than before, but he moved with pride. Sometimes they had coffee on the porch together. "You seem older," he said once. Jessa smiled faintly. He looked at her and nodded. Not in a bad way. She saw Calder's name once in a tech magazine at the grocery store. It was an article about the fastest rising CEOs under 35. He wore a dark blazer and looked like a man who got things done. She closed the magazine and left it behind the tomatoes. The truth was, she didn't hate him. She hated what he proved. That love, no matter how deep it feels, doesn't always mean someone will stay when you need them. And once someone leaves in your worst moment, you stop hearing their "I love you" the same way. People sometimes asked if she ever thought about reaching out. Just to ask why, her friend Elsie said once. Jessa shook her head. Asking why assumes he had a reason. I think it was just a choice. She didn't want to romanticize her healing. It wasn't poetry. It was grocery runs. It was putting her dad's socks on. It was learning how to say no to plans without guilt. It was remembering to breathe when anniversaries came quietly and left without comfort. She didn't need a grand moment to move on. She just needed every small one to matter. The bookstore's regulars knew her by name. One elderly woman brought her flowers every month. For being gentle, she said. A high schooler named Ben once told her, "You make the shop feel like a place no one wants to leave." Jessa took those comments and tucked them away. Not as compliments, but as evidence. Evidence that staying, showing up, wasn't small. It was everything. One evening, while rearranging a display, she pulled out a book Calder had once given her. It was a poetry collection. Slim, blue cover, soft, worn edges. Inside was a note he had written in the front page years ago. To Jessa, "The quiet in you taught me how to breathe slower." See, she stared at the page for a long moment, then placed the book on the donation pile. By the time he walked back into her store, 3 years later, she no longer carried grief like a bruise. It had turned into something else. Something firm. Something quiet. She didn't brace for closure. She didn't chase a conversation. She handed him a book and went back to her rhythm. He wasn't a dorm. He was just a man holding regret like a paperback. And she'd learned how to let go of weight that wasn't hers to carry. Have you ever had someone walk away when you needed them most? Not with cruelty, not with conflict, just with absence. What did that silence teach you? Leave a comment below if you've ever rebuilt yourself in quiet ways, and if you're still learning how to show up for others or for yourself. This story is for you. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The next chapter goes deeper into what it means to be present without asking for a second chance. The next Thursday, Calder came back. Same time, same quiet. Jessa was halfway through sorting a box of new arrivals when the bell over the bookstore door chimed. She glanced up, heart still and unbothered, but her breath caught. Not from surprise, not from hope. from the simple awareness of memory walking in again. He didn't say her name, didn't ask for anything. He nodded once. She returned it, barely, and kept shelving. The silence wasn't tense. It just existed. He browsed for a while. No questions. No conversation. After 20 minutes, he picked up a thin volume of poetry and walked to the counter. She rang it up, sliding the book into a brown paper bag. $9.80. He handed her a 10. When she gave him the change, he didn't take it right away. Instead, he asked quietly, "Do you still read out loud to the kids?" "Every Thursday," she said. Then she placed the change on the counter and moved on to the next customer. The next Thursday, he came back again. This time at 3:50. Story time started at 4. He didn't ask to stay. He sat in the far back of the store, near the potted fern by the window. Not close enough to distract, not far enough to pretend he wasn't there. Jessa pulled out the big picture book, greeted the 10 or so kids by name, and settled into the circle on the carpet. Today's story is about a fox who learns that rushing ruins everything, she said, smiling. Calder listened from a distance, quiet, arms folded, eyes focused, not on her, but on the children's reactions. The laughter, the gasps, the way one girl clutched her friend's hand during the sad part. When it ended, the kids clapped. A few hugged her knees again. Malcolm, the boy with zoo dreams, whispered, "That man was here again." "I know," Jessa said softly. She hadn't invited him, but she hadn't stopped him either. The following Monday, he came in with a box of children's books. New titles, diversity-focused authors, most with little gold award stamps on the covers. "Donated," he said, setting the box gently on the counter. She didn't look up from the register, but her fingers paused over the keys. "I remember you once said some of the kids don't have books at home." Jessa met his eyes, neutral, still. "Thanks," she said. He gave a slow nod and turned to leave. Her voice stopped him at the door. "These are good picks." He glanced over his shoulder. "I asked someone at the library," he said. "Figured they'd know better than me." She nodded once. They did. The next day, she walked into the store and found the counter wiped down, a small vase of fresh tulips beside the receipt printer. No note, no signature. She didn't remove them. She didn't smile either. People in town began to notice. Elsie stopped by after her shift at the coffee shop and leaned against the counter. "He's been here a lot lately." Jessa glanced over her glasses. "He likes poetry." "He likes you," Elsie said under her breath. Jessa shook her head, voice level. "He hasn't asked for anything." Elsie paused. "That's a first." They didn't say his name, but they both knew who she meant. On Thursday, Calder helped put out the carpet for story time. Didn't ask, just picked it up and laid it down, while Jessa arranged the books. He didn't say much, but he said everything with how careful he was, where he stood, what he touched, what he didn't assume. She noticed the restraint. She noticed that she wasn't annoyed by it. Later that evening, while she was restocking the top shelf, the ladder wobbled, just slightly. His hand appeared near the side, steadying it. She didn't startle, didn't mean to interrupt, he said. You didn't. He stayed there until she stepped down. They stood close for a second longer than necessary. Then she moved past him without a word. That night, when she turned off the store lights and stepped onto the porch, she saw a takeout cup of her favorite coffee sitting on the railing. Her name was scribbled on the lid in sharp black ink. No heart, no message, just her name. She took it inside. She didn't text him. She drank every drop. There was no apology, no dramatic monologue, no tearful confession. Just time and his choice to show up quietly, consistently, without asking for permission. And she didn't soften. Not yet. But she stopped waiting for him to disappear again, because for now, he was staying. It started with a flicker. The porch light above the bookstore's entrance buzzed twice, dimmed, then blinked out completely. Jessa noticed it at closing time on a Friday evening. She made a mental note to buy a replacement bulb in the morning. But the next morning, it was working again. No flicker, no buzz, just a steady, quiet glow. At first, she thought maybe it fixed itself. Then she saw the bulb's packaging folded neatly behind the counter. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did she. But the lights stayed on. That afternoon, it snowed lightly for the first time in weeks. The sidewalk turned soft and slippery. A few customers came in, boots wet and cheeks red. One mentioned they saw that quiet guy sweeping the front steps with a snow brush around 7 a.m. She didn't ask him to, but noticed. He wasn't inserting himself. He was reinforcing things she already did, just quietly, gently, as saying, I won't take over. I'll just be useful where I can. At dusk, she stepped outside to check the walkway salt supply when she saw him across the street. He was kneeling, helping Mr. Finch, her 80-year-old neighbor, gather papers scattered by the wind. Jessa paused. Calder wasn't looking for attention. He didn't even know she saw. Mr. Finch clapped him on the back. Calder laughed softly, stood, and nodded like it was no big deal. Then he looked up. Their eyes met. No smile, no wave, just recognition. She turned and walked back inside. But something in her pace had changed. That night, she made 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one she poured and left to cool. She wasn't ready to call it forgiveness, but she wasn't pretending not to care anymore either. On Sunday morning, She stood in the storage room, organizing event flyers, when she heard the bell over the front door. She knew the sound well, the weight of his steps even better. "I won't stay long," Calder said, lingering near the window seat. "Just wanted to drop something off." She peeked out from behind a shelf. He held a small box, reused, clean, carefully taped. "What's inside?" she asked, stepping forward. "Children's bookmarks." "Hand cut?" He scratched the back of his neck. "I saw a kid last week using a napkin." She arched an eyebrow. "Made them?" "I hired someone local," he said. "I figured if they last longer, they'll feel like the book belongs more to the kid." She took the box, weighing its lightness. "You think about things more now," she said, without inflection. "Too late?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't give the box back. They sat in silence for 10 minutes that day. He drank coffee. She relabeled the holiday shelf. At one point, she asked, "Why poetry?" He didn't look up. "It's the only thing that slowed my head down after I burned out." She nodded once. "It's the only thing that reminded me not everything had to be fixed." Their eyes met again, held, but only for a breath. On Monday, he didn't come in, nor on Tuesday, nor Wednesday. She didn't realize she'd noticed until Thursday came, and the store bell still didn't ring. She read to the children anyway. Malcolm asked if the man from last week would be back. "I don't know," Jessa replied honestly. She didn't owe anyone a performance. Not anymore. Friday morning, she unlocked the front door and paused. A small note had been slid under it, folded neatly. No envelope. Didn't want to overstay. Didn't want to disappear again either. Just giving you room to breathe. She held the paper for a long time, then placed it under the counter, near the bookmarks. That evening, around 6, the porch light flickered again. This time, she changed it herself, but she left the old bulb resting on the ledge, like a signal. If he passed by, he'd know she saw the flicker. And maybe, just maybe, that she missed the steadiness too. When she stepped outside to lock up, she looked across the street. He wasn't there, but the snow on the steps was freshly brushed again. No footprints, just the gesture. That was enough. Saturday morning came with clear skies and soft wind. The kind of day that made small-town sidewalks look brighter, even if the temperature still demanded coats and gloves. Jessa walked to the bookstore with her usual thermos in one hand and the keys jingling in the other. The city hadn't yet stirred fully. Just a few dog walkers, a sleepy barista prepping the first coffee batch across the street, and the quiet hum of weekend stillness. When she turned the corner, she stopped short. Her sidewalk was shoveled. Again, clean lines, salt scattered evenly. Steps brushed, no snow piles kicked lazily to the side. And there, in front of the shop window, sat a short, wooden bench. New, sturdy, simple design. A small handwritten card had been tied to one leg. You once told me, kids need somewhere to wait while their parents shop. Hope this works. Jessa stared at the bench, then glanced around. No sign of him. She unlocked the store, propped the door open for fresh air, and sat on the bench before stepping inside. Didn't wobble, didn't creak. It just held her. Later that morning, the first customer was Mr. Finch, who stopped just inside the door and tapped his cane against the new bench. "This you?" Jessa shook her head. "Well, tell whoever it was that it's about time someone thought of my niece." She smiled. "I'll pass it along." By noon, the store felt warm. People trickled in, browsing slowly. The poetry shelf saw more attention than usual. Jessa noticed one of Calder's past pics in a young woman's hands. She remembered the day he bought it, weeks ago, standing right where that woman stood now, quiet, uncertain, but still choosing to be there. She wasn't sure what to do with that memory, so she shelved it, gently, carefully, like any rare edition. At 2 p.m., the bell chimed again. Him. Jessa looked up. He carried a paper bag and 2 cups of coffee. "Peace offering," he said, not stepping past the threshold. "For what?" she asked. "For being present, then absent, then maybe present again." She studied him. His posture wasn't self-pitying. It was open, but cautious. "Come in," she said finally. He did. They sat in the reading nook, 2 worn armchairs, a chipped table between them. He handed her the coffee, her order, accurate. No fanfare. "What's in the bag?" He opened it and pulled out 2 scones from the cafe around the corner. "I remember you liked these. If you don't anymore, I won't take it personally." "I still do." They'd in silence for a few minutes. Not the awkward kind, the real kind, the honest, we don't need to fill every space kind. She spoke first. "Why'd you stop coming this week?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I didn't want to become noise or expectation." "You were neither, but I could have been. And I didn't want to undo what you let me build." She took a sip, watching him over the rim of the cup. "You haven't built anything, Calder." He nodded, slowly. "There." She waited, and when he didn't speak again, she added, "But you've been showing up, and that's not nothing." He leaned back, looking up at the ceiling for a moment. "I've been in therapy," he said quietly, "for almost a year." Jessa didn't flinch. "Good," she said. He looked surprised. "You're not going to ask why?" "No." She set her cup down. "If you're doing the work, the why doesn't matter to me. The how does." Calder blinked slowly. "You're still the most direct person I know." "I had to be." He nodded. "Fair." Outside, the bench caught afternoon sun. Calder noticed. You sat on it? Yes. Did it wobble? No. He smiled, almost fully this time. That's something, he said. It is, she replied, and neither of them anything for a while. She offered him a shift slot that day, an hour to shelve, while she handled invoices in the back. He didn't ask questions, just took the cart and started alphabetizing. At the end of his hour, she returned to find the shelves neat, the poetry table reorganized, and a sticky note that read, "Didn't move the Hemingway. Didn't feel brave enough." See, she laughed, and left the note where it was. That evening, she texted him for the first time in over 3 years. "Bench works. Thanks," he replied 2 minutes later. Anytime. The sticky note stayed on the poetry shelf for a full week. Customers noticed, smiled. One teenager even took a picture of it and whispered, "This guy's hilarious," before buying a novel and leaving with a grin. Jessa didn't move it. Did Anne tell? But she read it every morning when she turned on the lights. She never admitted it out loud, but the note made her feel companied. On Wednesday afternoon, as she restocked the nonfiction section, she heard soft footsteps behind her. "You forgot to add author labels to the new arrivals," Calder said gently. She turned around. "Did the first?" He handed her a stack of tiny blank stickers. "I know you're organized." Figured it was an oversight. She took the labels. "You're assuming a lot, only that you've had a full week." "I always have full weeks." He looked at her then. Really looked. "You still carry everything like it's light." "I just stopped expecting anyone to help lift." Calder didn't flinch. He just nodded. "That makes sense." No defense, no counter-explanation. Just truth sitting between them. Acknowledged. Thursday's story time came with 12 kids, 3 distracted parents, and 2 squirmy toddlers. Jessa read The Puddle That Grew Wings. By the end, one boy was pretending to fly, and a girl in pink overalls kept asking if puddles had feelings. When it ended, Calder was already putting away the carpet and gathering books without being asked. Jessa walked past him as she headed for the back room. "You do this well," he said. "What?" "Stand in the middle of a storm and make it feel like spring." She paused, looked back. "You used to say things like that before you left, too." "Meant them then." "Did stop you." He didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. On Saturday, a new customer walked in. A young woman, college-aged, sharp eyes, soft energy. She browsed for a long time, then approached the counter with a book of essays. "This place feels like it's built on something steady," she said. Jessa smiled faintly. "We do our best." As the customer left, Calder looked up from the side shelf he was dusting. "She's right," he said. "About what?" "You make spaces feel safe." She studied him. "Then why didn't you stay in one? His answer was quiet. I didn't feel safe in myself. Later that evening, they sat in the back office. Jessa was sorting invoices. Calder was repairing the leg of a broken stool. No music, no conversation, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like, did you ever think about coming back sooner? She asked without looking up. Yes, he replied, not hesitating. Why didn't you? Because I thought time would heal what I broke. She nodded slowly, and now I know time doesn't fix anything. People do, or they don't. She let that sit for a moment. Then she asked, "Are you here to fix things?" He shook his head. "I'm here to be consistent, even if nothing's ever repaired." Before closing, she saw him folding bookmarks again. Quietly, carefully. "You don't have to earn anything," she said, without looking at him. "I know," he replied, "but you still show up like you do. I do it for me, too." She set down the stack of papers. "Explain." "I used to think showing up was only about others, proving something, being useful. But now it's about who I want to be, even when no one's looking." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That's the first thing you've said that sounds like growth." Calder smiled, but didn't celebrate. "Then I'll keep going." Sunday morning, she opened the shop early. Quiet chill in the air. Sunlight streaming through the front windows. On the bench outside, she found a small bag of groceries, fresh apples, almond milk, her favorite granola. No note, but she knew he hadn't asked what she liked. But he'd listened. Weeks ago, a passing comment remembered. She stood there a while, holding the bag, then unlocked the door, left it open behind her. Jessa didn't call it anything. Not connection, not friendship, definitely not a restart. But it was something. She felt it when she unlocked the shop and found the porch swept clean again, even on mornings when it hadn't snowed. She felt it when Calder handed her coffee exactly the way she liked it. No ceremony, no words, just placed it near the register before shelving books. She especially felt it when he made no moves to reclaim a title he'd once abandoned. He didn't act like a man trying to resume love. He acted like someone who understood that love, if it existed at all now, would need to rise from somewhere deeper than memory. He didn't ask what they were, and for that alone, she let him stay. On Tuesday, the shop was quiet by midday. One customer in the back, rain against the windows. Jessa organized postcards near the register, while Calder updated inventory. "Did you ever date anyone else?" she asked, without looking up. He didn't pause. "After us?" "Yes." Silence. Then she asked, "Anyone serious?" "Only for a few months." She wanted more than I could give. Jessa nodded. "At least you were honest." "I wasn't," he said. "But I didn't lie either. I just left parts out. Same way I did with you." She didn't flinch. "Did you tell her that?" "Eventually." "And me?" He met her eyes. "This me telling you now." Jessa blinked once, then went back to stacking postcards. They didn't bring it up again, but later that evening, when she closed the register drawer and flicked off the front lights, Calder walked her to the door. He didn't touch her, but he stood closer than usual, close enough to be felt. And when she said good night, it didn't sound like a boundary. It sounded like something quietly opening. Thursday's story time drew more kids than usual. Word had spread about the lady who gave out bookmarks and always picked books with talking animals and big lessons hidden in small words. Jessa noticed Calder standing a little closer now, not inside the reading circle, but no longer by the window either. The kids accepted him. They didn't need to know what he was to her. They liked that he laughed when the fox character got stuck in a tree, that he helped clean up the scattered crayons, that he whispered, "You forgot your book bag," to the shy kid who always left something behind. Jessa didn't name it, but she watched it happen. On Saturday morning, they opened together. Calder brought her a breakfast sandwich. She poured him tea without asking. They sat behind the register, eating quietly before the door unlocked. "You know what I used to miss the most?" he asked, unwrapping the sandwich. "What?" "Mornings with you. Before the world wanted something from me." She didn't reply right away. Then she said, "The world didn't stop wanting things. You just stopped answering it." He looked at her, and this time he didn't try to explain. That afternoon, a delivery arrived. New shelving units for the back room. Jessa started unpacking. Calder joined without being asked. They worked in rhythm, quiet, steady. At one point, she dropped a screw, and he caught it before it rolled away. "Still good reflexes," she said. "Some stick," he replied. Their eyes held for a second too long. She looked away first. When the shelf was finished, they stood back and admired it. "Perfect," she said. "It leans a little," he noted. "So do I." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, but you hold more than most." She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. That evening, she invited him to dinner. Not out. "Home. I made soup," she said. He hesitated. "Is this?" "No," she said firmly. "It's soup." He smiled. "Then I'd love some." They sat in her small kitchen, bowls warm between their hands, music playing low in the background. Her father was out visiting a friend. The house was still. They ate slowly, talked about bucks, about nothing, about what made quiet feel full instead of empty. After they ate, she stood by the sink, rinsing dishes. Calder leaned against the wall, drying. "You don't owe me this," he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. And you don't have to explain anything either, he added. I know that, too. He nodded. I just want to be where I'm allowed to be. No label. No title. Just present. Jessa turned off the faucet, wiped her hands. You've been showing up, she said. I have, and you've been quiet about it. I wanted my actions to do more than my voice ever did. She stepped closer. You're still here. I am. Neither moved. Neither reached. Neither rushed. But something between them shifted. Something gentle. Something earned. She walked him to the door. Didn't hug him. Didn't stop him. But when he stepped outside, she left the porch light on after he was gone. Long after. Jessa found herself listening for his steps. She didn't plan to. It wasn't conscious. But every time the bell above the bookstore door chimed, something inside her waited half a beat longer than usual. Not out of need, out of memory. Because once he didn't walk through that door again, and now he kept doing it. On Monday, he came in early and took over cleaning the front windows. She didn't ask. He didn't speak, just set the bucket down, rolled his sleeves up, and went to work like it was routine. She noticed the scar near his wrist. Small, thin, the kind you don't see unless you've looked closely. She remembered when he got it, trying to open a wine bottle with a pocket knife because the corkscrew broke. They'd laughed so hard that night. He'd bled through a dish towel, and she made him promise not to ever touch kitchen tools again. She hadn't thought of that night in years, but now, watching him move slowly across the glass with steady hands, it came back like it had waited. They didn't talk until nearly closing. She was shelving paperbacks. He walked past with a tray of mismatched mugs he'd washed without asking. As he passed, he said softly, I still hear that voicemail sometimes. Jessa didn't stop shelving. What part? She asked. The silence after I said I needed space. She slid a book into place. That wasn't the worst part. I know, he said. The worst part was not coming back. She paused, then said, the worst part was coming back, and assuming I'd want to hear anything. Calder placed the tray down on the back counter. I didn't come back for a conversation. I came back for the quiet. She turned to face him. Then stay quiet. But stay for real this time. They didn't speak for the rest of the evening, but when she locked the store and he walked her to the corner, she didn't say goodbye. She just nodded once. He nodded back, like both of them understood something was shifting. On Wednesday, a storm rolled in. Not a dramatic one. Just steady rain, slow winds, gray skies. The kind of storm that settles into your clothes and your bones. He arrived drenched. No umbrella. She tossed him a towel without looking up from the register. You're late, he grinned, wiping his face. I stopped to help a woman whose grocery bag broke on the sidewalk. She arched an eyebrow. That sounds made up. It was real. Bread everywhere. She smirked. You're still too good at sounding sincere. I'm working on being sincere. Instead, they shared lunch in the break room. Peanut butter sandwiches and apples. Like old times, but nothing like old times. Old times were full of promise. This was full of proof. After lunch, she asked, "Did you ever regret it?" He looked up. "Leaving? No. Leaving without letting me say anything first." His jaw tightened. "Every day," she nodded slowly. "Good, not cruel, just honest." She deserved to say it. That evening, her father stopped by the shop. He walked slowly but strong, cane tapping rhythm across the hardwood floor. Calder greeted him respectfully. Her father watched him for a long moment, then asked, "You staying this time?" Calder didn't flinch. "I am, sir." Her father didn't smile, didn't welcome him. He just nodded. "That's the bare minimum." "I know," Calder said, but something softened in Jessa's chest as she listened. Her father hadn't slammed the door, and Calder hadn't pretended. It didn't need to be earned. Later that night, as they closed up, Calder asked quietly, "Do you think your dad will forgive me?" Jessa locked the register. "I think he's waiting to see if I do first." Calder didn't respond. Anne didn't explain. The rain kept falling. He walked her home. Didn't bring up the past. Didn't ask to come in. Didn't lean in for anything more than a good night. But when she stepped inside, she hesitated, turned back, and handed him the extra key to the bookstore. "Just in case I'm late one morning," she said. He took it slowly, held it like it meant more than he could say, because it did. That night, she didn't leave the porch light on for him. She left it on for herself, because she'd learned something. Forgiveness doesn't start with a clean slate. It starts with letting someone stay, even when the old words haven't fully faded from the room. Saturday morning began with sleet tapping against the windows, thin and cold. Jessa stood behind the bookstore counter, holding her thermos with both hands, watching the gray light settle over the front steps. The town was quieter than usual. Winter always slowed foot traffic, but it brought a kind of intimacy to the shop. Fewer customers, longer conversations, more time to notice the way things settled or unsettled. At 9:06 a.m., Calder walked in with no coffee in hand, no errands to disguise his presence. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm. "You're late," she replied without looking up. "I stopped to grab fresh muffins for the kid with the glasses, the one who forgets lunch." "You mean Leo?" "Yeah, that's him." She finally met his eyes. "I didn't know you remembered names. I remember what matters now, he said, setting the paper bag on the counter. She didn't smile, but she didn't turn away either. At 10 a.m., Leo arrived early for the community book club with his grandmother. The moment he spotted the bag, he gasped. "Blueberry?" he asked, eyes wide. "Someone dropped them off," Jessa said, nodding toward the counter. Leo ran to it like it was a treasure chest. He didn't notice Calder shelving books on the other side of the store, but Jessa did. Around noon, Calder asked if she wanted lunch. She shook her head. He didn't push. Instead, he brought out a folding chair from the back room and sat near the poetry section, sorting, reading, saying nothing. When the lull hit, she sat on the bench outside for a moment, breathing in cold air and watching the sky blur behind wet clouds. He came out a few minutes later, coat unzipped, hands in pockets. "Need anything?" he asked. "No." "Oh, what?" He didn't sit beside her. He sat one step below, elbows on his knees, giving her height, space, choice. They watched traffic pass. Someone honked. Dog barked. Jessa spoke first. "Why did you stay away for so long, if you always planned to come back?" Calder looked out at the street. "I didn't always plan to come back." She turned slightly. "Then why did you?" He didn't rush his answer. "I started listening to people who weren't trying to fix me. They just said, if it still matters to you, show up without trying to rewrite anything. Just be that enough." No, but it was a place to start. She watched a couple cross the street, laughing under one umbrella. Then she asked, "Do you miss who you were when you were with me?" Calder's answer was low. "I miss who I didn't know how to be." Jessa looked at him for a long moment. "You always had the choice." "I know," he said. "I chose wrong. Then I stayed gone because it was easier than facing that. And now I'm here. Not to fix what I broke, just to hold what still matters." They sat like that for a while. Then Jessa stood and brushed off her coat. "I have inventory to log." He nodded. "I'll finish reorganizing biographies." She didn't stop him, didn't thank him, didn't explain how much she noticed. But as she walked back in, she looked over her shoulder and said, "You know Leo's favorite author?" Calder blinked. "Not yet." Kate DiCamillo. Read something by her. He likes when people ask questions about the pages. Calder smiled. "Got it." Inside, she heard him mutter the name as he scanned the shelf. She didn't correct his pronunciation. Some things people needed to learn on their own. That afternoon, the store felt fuller than usual. Nothing dramatic. "Jew, right." Calder moved like he wasn't trying to earn his place. He simply filled the gaps that needed filling. A crooked frame? He straightened it. A dusty corner? He wiped it. A crying toddler? He made a paper mouse out of scrap receipt tape. Not to impress, but because it helped. Before closing, Jessa noticed something else. Her own shoulders weren't so tense anymore. The door chimed less sharply. The lights felt warmer, and maybe it had nothing to do with Calder. But maybe it had something to do with him, not needing to be more than who he was right now. Not a fixer, not a title, just someone who stayed. Tuesday came with a power outage. Mid-morning, all the lights cut out at once. No warning, no flicker, just sudden quiet. The kind that only happens when electricity vanishes and life slows with it. Jessa stood behind the register, hands over the barcode scanner. Calder was restocking the rotating rack near the front when everything went still. She glanced up. He didn't panic. Did Al speak? Just looked over at her, like always. Want me to check the breaker? He offered. No need, she replied. It's the whole block. Listen, outside, the traffic lights were dark. Street lamps off. The bakery across the street already had a staff member standing at the door with a flashlight and an apologetic shrug to every customer. Inside the shop, a strange hush settled in. Calder stepped closer. You okay? Yeah, she said, stepping out from behind the counter. It's just quiet. He nodded. It's strange when it gets this quiet. She folded her arm. Not for me. They lit the backup candles Jessa kept behind the counter. Wide, low ones in recycled tea tins. The bookstore glowed in soft flickers, like a memory come to life. Customers trickled out. Most apologized and promised to return later. She assured them it was fine. By noon, only she and Calder remained. No sales, no scanning, just stillness. He set a candle in the middle of the reading nook table. She brought out 2 mugs of lukewarm tea, still warm enough from the thermos she always kept in the back. They sat across from each other, sipping slowly. You ever miss the noise? He asked. I think I missed the quiet more. Calder leaned back, one arm across the chair. I used to fill every moment with sound, he said. Podcasts, meetings, music, something to outrun my own thoughts. And now? Now I let them catch up. She tilted her head. And what do they say? He looked at her, steady. They say I left someone who never asked for more than presence. And I couldn't even give her that. She didn't react. Didn't need to. The candle flickered between them. Later, as the store remained dim, Jessa walked to the front and pulled open the door. Cold air rushed in. She stood in the frame, eyes scanning the quiet block. Calder stepped beside her. He didn't touch her, but he stood close. Then she said something he didn't expect. I used to think you'd walk back through the door one day, with a speech, an apology, a grand reason. Calder stayed silent. I waited for it. Until one day, I didn't anymore. And that scared me. He swallowed. Why? Because it meant you were real. And I'd have to forgive a real person, not just a ghost. He looked at her, slowly. And now? She shook her head. I don't need a speech. I just need to know you're not disappearing the next time something gets hard. He didn't nod, didn't promise, just, okay. And for the first time, she missed him, while he was still standing right beside her. At 3 p.m., the power returned with a hum. Lights flickered on. Systems rebooted. She stepped back inside. He followed, slower. Neither of them rushed to resume anything. Instead, Jessa walked behind the counter, looked down at the till, and said, "You can go if you want." "I'd rather stay," Calder replied. She didn't say yes, didn't say no, just started scanning a few restocked books as the till rebooted. He returned to the shelf he'd been at hours earlier, and the rhythm resumed, quietly, naturally. That night, he didn't walk her home. She didn't ask, and that absence didn't scare her. It softened her, because for the first time in years, she knew what it meant for someone to stay, even when they weren't right next to you. That kind of presence, that kind stays longer than a body ever can. Have you ever been around someone who didn't ask to be forgiven, but just kept showing up quietly, trying to do better? Maybe it wasn't a grand gesture. Maybe they didn't even say much, but they stayed. What meant more to you? The words they said, or the things they did when no one was watching? Drop a comment if you've experienced that kind of quiet effort. We'd love to hear what you learned from it. And if this chapter stirred something in you, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The hardest part of rebuilding trust is still ahead. By now, Calder had become part of the store's rhythm. He knew where the tape was. He knew which light switch flickered. He knew the broom had to be held a certain way, or the handle came loose. But he never acted like he owned anything. He never reached for the keys unless she handed them. Never adjusted the playlist unless she was busy. Never made himself the center of the space. Instead, he noticed what needed doing and did it. Then stepped back like it was never his idea. One morning, Jessa noticed the bottom shelf near the window had been re-leveled. It had leaned for months, just slightly. Never enough to cause problems. Just enough to irritate her quietly every time she walked by. She crouched and ran her fingers along the edge. Flat, balanced. She didn't ask. He didn't mention it, but when she caught him adjusting the display table later, she looked at him. "You fixed the shelf." He shrugged. Deserved better. She didn't say thank you. Later that week, she found a small hand-sewn pillow tucked into the corner of the kids' reading nook. Bright colors, soft fabric, stitched initials. Elsie. Leo's grandmother had made it after Calder. Quietly mentioned, he always slumped when he sat for story time. "I just mentioned it," he said when Jessa noticed. "Did ask her to do anything." "You didn't have to," Jessa replied. "You made space for her to care." He looked up from his clipboard. I think I used to assume people only helped if you earned it. And now I think people help when you stop standing in the way. She nodded once, then went back to inventory. On Friday afternoon, she caught him talking to a customer, an older man who used to own a small auto shop in town. Jessa was in the back office, organizing receipts, but she heard the conversation drift in. I had a shop once, too, Calder said. The man laughed. You don't strike me as the mechanic type. I wasn't, Calder replied. It was metaphorical. My shop just sold things that broke a little quieter. The man paused. Tech? Yeah, you still run it. No, Calder said softly. Not like before. There was something in his voice. Humility, without shame. Jessa stood in the doorway, listening without interrupting, and for the first time, she didn't hear the man who left her behind. She heard the man who was starting to understand how to stay. That evening, she noticed the tip jar had been cleaned. It sparkled under the counter light. She hadn't even realized it had gotten cloudy. She walked to the back, leaned against the doorframe. You're quiet today, she said. Calder looked up from a pile of bookmarks. Didn't want to break anything? You haven't? That's new, he said, more to himself. She stepped into the room. You know, she said, most people who hurt someone look for a moment to be seen fixing it. He set the stack down carefully, and I've been trying not to look for that. She nodded. You've succeeded. He glanced up. That good? It's honest. The next morning, before she even opened the front door, she found a clipboard waiting on the bench. On it was a list. Things that still need doing, but only if you approve. Fix the back storage lock. Replace the squeaky display wheel. Ask about repainting the storefront if spring. Budget allows. Offer to stay late during inventory. Keep my distance when it's too much. Stay, even when it's nothing at all at the bottom, in small handwriting. Let me help build what I once left unsupported. No spotlight needed. See, she stood there for a long time, reading it, then took the clipboard inside. Didn't comment on it, didn't hand it back, just placed it in the back office, beside the receipt folders, and left it open, like permission. The following Monday, Jessa didn't check her phone after closing, didn't glance at the time, didn't count down until Calder left. She locked up like she always did, walked around flipping switches, and realized something halfway through wiping the counter. He hadn't said goodbye, and she hadn't asked when he was going. She stood still for a moment, cloth in hand, noticing, not worried, just noticing. At first she thought it was a slip, a momentary lapse in the watchfulness she'd carried since the day he left. But then Tuesday came, and Wednesday, and each night the same rhythm continued. He stayed until the shop quieted. He worked until her checklist emptied. He shelved. He restocked. He didn't linger too long, didn't vanish too soon, and not once did she ask, when he planned to stop coming. Because she didn't wonder anymore. She knew. On Thursday, a delivery arrived late. 10 new boxes of children's books, stacked messily, wet at the bottom from the delivery truck's leak. Jessa groaned, crouched, and opened the first box. Calder knelt beside her. Without a word, they worked side by side, drying each cover gently with cloth towels, inspecting pages, tossing the ruined ones without complaint. Halfway through the 5th box, she glanced over and asked, "Don't you have other things to do?" He paused. "I probably do." She tilted her head. "But you're here." He smiled. "I'd rather be nowhere else." She didn't smile back. But she didn't look away either. Later, after the books were sorted and shelves rearranged, they sat on the floor in the back, backs to the wall, shoes off. The store was music off, only the low hum of the heater kicking in every 10 minutes. She took a sip from her thermos, then asked, "Did you come back to pick up where we left off?" He exhaled slowly. "No." She looked over. He continued, "I came back because I finally realized that what I had with you was never something to get back to. It was something I never really honored the first time." Jessa leaned her head against the wall. "You really think you didn't?" "I loved you," he said. She nodded. "No, but love wasn't enough," he added. "I wasn't present. I wasn't consistent. I disappeared when it got uncomfortable. And that's not love in practice. That's love in theory." She closed her eyes for a second. "Then, you're doing better now." He looked over. "Does that mean anything to you?" Jessa met his eyes. "It means something to me, but not everything yet." He nodded once. "That's fair." That night, when he stood to leave, she stayed seated. He picked up his coat. She didn't say good night. He didn't wait for her to. He walked to the door, gave a soft knock on the frame before leaving, and disappeared into the cold. She didn't watch him go, not because she didn't care, but because, for the first time, his leaving didn't feel like an ending, just part of the night. The next day, Leo walked in with his grandmother, holding a folded drawing. He handed it Jessa proudly. It showed stick figures, a bookstore, a long bench, and 2 people standing near each other, one holding a book, the other a broom. She smiled. "That me?" He nodded. "And Mr. Calder?" Jessa blinked. "You know his name?" "Yeah," Leo said. "He always helps me when I drop my backpack." She looked at the drawing again. The 2 figures weren't holding hands. They weren't hugging. They were just near each other, side by side. Later that evening, Jessa told Calder about the picture. He laughed softly, a hand over his mouth, then said, "At least I didn't get drawn as the trash can." She grinned despite herself. "Leo likes you," she said. Like, Leo, the store? I'm starting to like who I am when I'm in it. She paused. That's a good answer, he shrugged. I'm not answering to win. I know, she replied. That's why it matters more. Before he left, she handed him a wrapped sandwich from the back. No onions, she said. He blinked. You remembered you said it once, months ago. He stared at her for a long moment, then took the sandwich. Quiet. Thanks, she nodded. You're welcome. He stepped out the door. She didn't leave the light on, but she unlocked it, just in case. By mid-February, the town thawed just enough to make sidewalks slushy and the air feel less sharp. Inside the bookstore, light streamed through the windows with more strength than weeks prior. The heater clicked off less often, and Jessa found herself opening the front door for air again. Calder was in the back room, restocking greeting cards. Jessa stood near the register, glancing out the window as Malcolm sprinted past with a paper airplane, followed by a sibling and a laugh. She smiled without thinking, and when Calder returned, holding 2 uneven stacks of cards and trailing a paperclip on his sleeve, he paused in the doorway, then said softly, You smile different now. She turned, halfway to brushing him off, but stopped. I don't know what that means. It used to be guarded, polite. Now it's, he shrugged, not trying to sound poetic. Now it feels like it comes from here. He placed a hand gently at his chest. She didn't respond right away, then asked, Do you keep score of things like that? No, he said, but I don't forget them either. Later that day, while Jessa rearranged the nonfiction table, a woman stepped inside, holding a baby in one arm and tapping a stroller with the other. Hi, she greeted brightly. Sorry. Do you have somewhere quiet? I could nurse for a few minutes. Jessa started to respond, but Calder appeared from the side shelf. We've got a chair by the back window, he said gently. Soft lighting. You'll have privacy. The woman blinked. Thank you. He nodded and led her over without fanfare. Jessa watched from across the room, watched the way he didn't hover, didn't act like he'd done something noble, just offered what was needed and went back to shelving. After the woman left, grateful and a little lighter, Jessa said, You didn't flinch. Why would I? 3 years ago, you used to step back anytime someone needed something emotional. He smiled faintly. I still do sometimes, but today I didn't. She crossed her arms loosely. You're not perfect, Calder. I hope not. Perfect people don't grow. She studied him, then returned to sorting the stack. But her hand moved slower, like her mind stayed with him. That evening, they sat together on the bench outside. It was cold, but bearable. The kind of cold that wakes you up, not drives you in. Jessa wrapped her hands around her cup. Calder sat beside her, not too close, not too far. They watched the the street, the bakery across the road, the quieting town. You used to look at me like I was the finish line, she said suddenly. Calder turned. What do you mean? Back then, you looked at me like once I was yours. You didn't have to try anymore. His shoulders dropped slightly. She went on. But now, you look at me like you're just glad I'm still here. He nodded. That's exactly what it is. She glanced at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel the ache of that old truth. She felt the softness of the new one. Inside, the lights glowed warm. The store looked full, even without a single customer. I used to think love had to be earned with big things, he said quietly. And now I think it has to be earned with consistent small ones. Jessa didn't answer. She leaned back slightly. Let the quiet do what words couldn't. He didn't press, didn't look for reassurance. He just waited, and when they went back inside, he picked up the broom and swept the corners before she asked. She watched him as he moved through the store like he finally belonged. Not because he took up space, but because he respected every inch of it. And for the first time, what stayed wasn't the memory of being left. It was the way he looked at her now. Not like he was trying to win her, but like he had finally learned how to see her. That Saturday, the bookstore buzzed. Not with volume, but with presence. A book fair was scheduled for the nearby elementary school, and several parents stopped by for last-minute recommendations. Kids ran between shelves, while tired mothers exchanged notes about reading levels and reluctant readers. Jessa moved with focus, guiding, recommending, smiling with that light ease she'd earned over time. Calder stayed near the center table, tying a loose knot in the storytime rug where a corner had frayed. He didn't ask if she needed help. He simply filled the spaces she never had to point out anymore. By late afternoon, the rush had faded. The lights seemed dimmer, the shelves fuller. Jessa sat behind the counter, with a receipt roll in her hand, fingers busy but mind distant. Calder sat across from her, arms folded, watching the street outside. Neither of them spoke, but the silence wasn't void. It was comfort. It was a silence that could hold two people without making them feel alone. At one point, he reached into his pocket and set a folded slip of paper on the counter. She didn't open it right away. What's this? He shrugged lightly. Just something I wrote down last week. She glanced at him. You journaling now? Sometimes, he said. Helps me get out of my own head before I say something I don't mean. She held the paper between two fingers. That's new. I'm trying to make that sentence true about a lot of things. She tucked the paper into her pocket without unfolding it. Not dismissively, just not urgently. I'll read it later. He nodded. That's fine. They shared a quiet dinner after closing. Chinese takeout, eaten from paper containers with metal forks, because neither of them had the patience for chopsticks that night. Jessa sat on the armrest of the reading nook couch. Calder sat on the rug, cross-legged, leaning against a stack of discount books. Halfway through her lo mein, she said, "You haven't asked me if I'm ready to try again." He didn't look up. "No, why not? I figure if I have to ask, then we're not." She stopped chewing, stared at him. He kept his eyes on his container. Calm, present, not fishing for approval. "And if I am?" she asked. He looked up slowly. "I'm not here to pressure that answer out of you." "I know," she said, then added, "But I'd like you to know it anyway." His fork dilled. "Then, okay." No smile, no gasp, no dramatic shift. Just that single word, quiet and steady. She smiled, but only a little. "You're not going to ruin it with a speech. I've ruined enough with speeches." She nudged his knee with her foot. Fair. After dinner, they cleaned up together. No flirting, no gestures that felt like expectations. Just presence, divided by shared responsibility. Maybe that why it felt safe. When she walked him to the door, she didn't say goodbye. She held it open. He stepped out, but before he left, she pulled the folded note from her pocket and placed it in his hand. "I didn't read it," she said. "That's okay, but I want you to keep it." He stared at the paper, confused. She added, "Whatever you wrote down last week doesn't matter as much as what you choose to keep writing." Then she stepped back and closed the door, gently, not to shut him out, but to give both of them room to let the new chapter begin, with nothing forced, no question asked. And yet, somehow, the answer already given. Sunday came quietly. The town moved slower than usual, as it always did after a stretch of cold days. But the bookstore opened on time. The bell chimed at 10 a.m. sharp. The front window glowed warm with new morning light. Jessa stood at the register, flipping through a new release. She was halfway through the first chapter when she realized she hadn't thought about whether Calder would come. She just assumed he would. And that startled her, not in a bad way, but in a way that said something had settled inside her she hadn't named yet. A kind of peace. He walked in at 10:15, holding 2 coffees and a small paper bag. No words, no nod. He simply placed 1 cup beside her book and the bag near her elbow. "You didn't ask what I wanted today," she said, glancing up. "I didn't have to," he replied, unbothered. She pulled out the contents of the bag, a fresh croissant, her favorite, almond. "You're getting confident," she teased. He looked her in the eye. "No, just paying attention." She looked down, not to hide emotion, but to let it rest somewhere safe. The moved without friction. They restocked, handled the light flow of customers, and prepared for next week's spring display. He climbed the ladder while she arranged the new titles. They spoke little, but their timing, their movements, their glances, it all felt practiced, familiar, unforced. At one point, A little girl wandered in, eyes wide, dragging her mother toward the reading nook. "Is the place with the fox books?" she asked excitedly. Jessa crouched down. "Yes, it is." The girl spun once in place. "Can I stay here forever?" Calder laughed softly from a few feet away. "You're not the only one asking that," he said under his breath. Jessa heard it, but she didn't reply. She didn't need to. In the early afternoon, as customers thinned, Jessa pulled out a box from storage labeled "Old Stock. Decisions Needed." They sat on the floor, back to back, sorting books into piles. Donate, discount, keep. She handed him a dusty hardback. "Would you want to read this again?" He read the title aloud, then paused. "The Distance Between Words." He turned it over. "This one's ironic." "Why?" He glanced at her over his shoulder. "Because that used to be our problem." She kept sorting. "Used to be?" "Well, not today." She didn't argue, didn't confirm it either. But a small smile tugged at the edge of her mouth. And he noticed. After the piles were built and boxed, she leaned against the wall, hands behind her head. "You remember the day I handed you the store keys?" she asked. Calder nodded. "You told me to open without breaking anything." "I didn't mean they shelves." "I know." She turned her head toward him. "You were careful. That morning, I was scared." "Of what?" "Of earning another chance and wasting it." She didn't reply for a while, then said, "I didn't think you'd come back." "I didn't either," he admitted. "What changed?" He looked at her, not quickly, but fully. "I missed being someone who was welcome. And you were the only person who ever made me feel like I didn't have to prove myself to deserve that." The room stayed quiet after that, but the quiet was full, like a truth had been placed in the center, and neither of them wanted to move it. As they packed up for the evening, Calder lingered near the counter while Jessa counted the till. He didn't ask if she wanted company. He didn't ask if she was tired. He just stood where he'd always stood, just a little closer now. When she finished counting, she looked at him and asked, "What time are you getting here tomorrow?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You want me here?" She rolled her eyes lightly. "I didn't ask that." He laughed. "I'll be here at 10. "Good," she said, then added, "Don't be late." That night she walked home with her bag over one shoulder and her fingers wrapped around the coffee cup he'd brought her that morning. It was empty, but she carried it anyway, because it meant something. Something she wasn't naming, but something she was no longer afraid to hold.